today, so hopefully everything will be heard. Also less windy, so my notes won't be flying around. Before we go break down what happened today in the courtroom before lunch, we are now broke for lunch, I want to talk about Savea Robinson really quickly. His mother approached me very kindly at the courthouse, and she said that I had said somewhere I identified Savea Robinson as she, which is incorrect. He is a he, and he is the victim of the shooting that Quando Rondo was allegedly the target of. Robinson's mother approached me again very kindly and wanted me to make sure that that was not misstated, and I'm going to go back through my written reporting and just make sure I have that cleared up everywhere. But very kind, wanted me to know, just make sure that I was reporting on her son's death accurately, which I appreciate her approaching me and letting me know that that was missaid. But as far as how the courtroom went today, the judge opened up with a moment of silence for Dolly Parton. He said that was certainly a loss. So we all had a moment of silence for Dolly Parton in the courtroom today. Then we got back to detectives, or a special agent from the FBI, Jaron Farmby's testimony, and he was testifying for the prosecution. So we went back to text messages. That was a really big thing that was discussed today. We looked at text messages between Durk and others, specifically one where Durk had been messaging Jason Smith, asking him to book flights. This was not in relation to the alleged murder for hire. This was at a different time. This was on December 3rd of 2022, but they brought up these text messages presumably to show that this was a normal occurrence, Jason Smith booking flights for Durk, because Jason Smith booked flights leading up to the alleged murder for hire and the hit on Quando Rondo. We also saw a post by King Von on his Instagram. The very first line I was able to write down, it said, "If Smirk," which is Durk, wants a dude dead, then that dude is dead. And dude is the word they were using there and when they were saying this out loud. And King Von's post was later brought up on cross-examination by Brian Steele. And Brian Steele asked Farmby, is what King Von was really saying was that Banks gave him opportunity, that Banks gave him a career? And Farmby confirmed, yes, that is in fact what was saying. We have a lot going on over there. Next, we talked about text, or a video. A video was shown in the courtroom of a video that they called Red Man, I believe. Yes, a Red Man video. And this was found on a phone connected to Durk, and this was allegedly never released. May have been stipulation about that, but this video was allegedly never released, but on Durk's phone. It was professionally produced, and it depicts Durk seeing news articles about King Von's death. He looks very upset when he's reading this, and then he gets out a gun and he shoots. In the video, Durk is depicted shooting a man dressed in similar attire as Timothy Leaks was when he killed King Von. Then Durk gets in the car, smiles, drives off. This is all in a music video. There's music playing in the background. And this was like, people were shocked by this video in the courtroom, but then it's brought back up by Brian Steele when he asks Farmby, was this professionally produced? Farmby says it is. He asks Farmby if he ever went in to ask the production people, a part of the production, the record label, like were they ever asked questions about this video? And Farmby said to his knowledge he doesn't believe they were. He did not ask these people these questions. And then Brian Steele also asks whether or not, I'm losing my train of thought here, but Brian Steele also asks if there was a written list of people involved in this video and if Durk was on this list, and I believe Farmby said that Durk was not on this list of people who were a part of the production of this video. He was in it, and that is what was said about that. We also had the TMZ video played again, which is when Savea Robinson is pulled from the car and Quando Rondo is screaming "no, no" with a lot of anguish in his voice. And when that video was played, Robinson's mom leaves the courtroom. It's obviously a very difficult video for her to watch, so she left the courtroom the second that TMZ logo came up, and then she promptly returned as soon as it was over. We also have text messages between a group chat with Durk and Wilson and David Salisbury, who I believe the other name he is called is Duty Low, I think is what I was hearing. So Durk says they're kind of all discussing Hester. Hester is expected to testify today, though he was expected to testify yesterday and we didn't hear from him. But they're discussing Hester's going to tell soon. Durk writes he gonna tell soon. Wilson says he think he can break us down. Someone labeled Loyal in the group chat says beware of everybody, not just Jam, and Jam is Hester. And then Durk ends, like the last message we see in that group chat is Durk saying, as long as we don't break, they can tell them whatever. So then that is the end of Farmby's testimony with the prosecution, and then Brian Steele comes on the scene and had a lot to contradict, and it got very emotional because he brings back up King Von's murder, which we'd seen a video of yesterday in court. We don't see the video again today, but when we saw the video, King Von is on the ground and Quando Rondo drags him, and this is something Brian Steele brings up. He says that King Von is Quando Rondo is dragging King Von like a piece of trash, and he says this over and over, and he's asking Farmby if he agrees with this, and Farmby says, I don't know his mindset, and Brian Steele catches that, and Brian Steele says, you don't know his mindset or anyone else's mindset but your own, something along that line. And Farmby says yes. So I think what they're trying to do here is you can't guess what these things that are being said in court mean unless you're the person that said them. That is what I think Brian Steele's point was there. Brian Steele also asks Farmby why the case against Timothy Leaks, which we saw earlier, was dismissed, because it is a big point that Timothy Leaks is released from prison. His charges are dismissed for the killing of King Von, and Brian Steele asks Farmby why this was. He said there was a little bit of back and forth, but finally he says he believes it's self-defense, and Steele asks Farmby, where do you see self-defense? And Farmby says there are certain situations in which individuals are in danger. If individuals feel like they're in danger, that's considered self-defense. But it is also made very clear when you see the video and when it's spoken about in court that Timothy Leaks comes out of the car and shoots at King Von when King Von is in a fist fight with Quando Rondo. So he inserts himself into the situation per the video, and there is no interaction between him, Timothy Leaks, and King Von prior to Timothy Leaks pulling out his gun. So that is brought up, and then we talk about grief. Brian Steele focused a lot on the grief and the hurt that group members and OTF, specifically Durk, was feeling, and he kind of he said, I hope it's not personal, but you could see a lot of people in the room getting very quiet, getting very solemn, and it felt very tense. But he said, I hope this isn't personal, but when you lose someone who's so close to you, who's like family, you are very hurt, right? And Farmby says yes. And he's not making eye contact with Brian Steele at this moment. He's kind of looking around the room. It was just a very like rough moment in the courtroom, because I think we were all feeling what those words are going to emotionally draw within you. And then he asks if the investigation was taking personal feelings from private conversations between Durk, between other members, these things that he said were raw, to prove a narrative, to prove the government's narrative, to prove the prosecution's narrative. And Farmby said, I don't believe so. Farmby said he did not believe that that's what was happening. They were not proving a narrative with these personal conversations, but they are using them as proof in this case. He also, Steele, asked Farmby, do people say things when they're mad, when they're grieving, that they don't mean? Do they do things that they don't mean? And with time later, because this murder did occur, the 2022 murder occurred 2 years after King Von. So they're asking, like, are they saying these things, doing these things, but with time they might not actually mean them or do them? And Farmby says that's possible. This is a point of time where Robinson's mother was shaking her head and saying, she had her arms crossed. She was not comfortable with this line of questioning, it didn't seem like, in the courtroom. And then Steele asks Farmby, what did you expect these people, Durk, other friends of King Von, what do you expect them to think after the murder of their friend? And there is no answer to this. Farmby has a really long pause. Steele calls it a pregnant pause, and Steele says, I'm gonna move on. So they do move on to other text messages the prosecution have brought forward, in which it was shown that Durk likely had access to Leek's address, where he was under home arrest after he was arrested and then later released for the murder of King Von. Steele points out these messages show that Durk had Leek's address. And then he asks Farmby, do you have any personal knowledge of, or I think first he asks, how many shootings do you know of, drive-by shootings at Leek's address? And Farmby says he knows nothing about that. And he said, Steele said, do you have any personal knowledge of any drive-by shootings in front of Leek's house when Durk allegedly had access to this address? And Farmby said no, he has no personal knowledge of any drive-by shootings happen. I think the defense, Steele was trying to prove that Durk had an opportunity prior and never took it. So I think the assumption is, why would he then plan this future murder for hire hit? Brian Steele also brings to the point that it's very normal to change your phone number for some people. It was brought up yesterday that Durk's phone number changed 17 times. So Steele points out, are you aware that it's very normal for people, especially people who are well known, if their number is released, to change their number frequently? If it gets out, you want to change it. Farmby said yes, he is aware that this is possible. Also, something that's been brought up by Steele twice now is Hester, who is testifying for the prosecution. Hester's kid. His kid was in school, his kid was on a soccer team. There is something about Hester and his kid that Brian Steele wants to bring up in court. It's been shot down twice. He's not able to ask these questions, but we are definitely going to hear about it when Steele cross-examines Hester in the future, hopefully today. So much happened today. I think I'm getting to the end of my notes now. Cameras, the issue of these recordings with the cooperators is what they're calling it. They weren't recorded. And Brian Steele hammers home this point again. We talked about it yesterday. But he can't get Farmby to say that it was wrong that they didn't record. The detective yesterday did say he prefers to always record. He couldn't get Farmby to say that same answer. So he does something interesting. He brings up body cameras on officers. Why do those exist? And at first Farmby is like, they exist for safety and security reasons. It's kind of like a dodgy answer. And then Brian Steele says, are they not worn by officers because officers have sometimes, not all the time, sometimes tried to cover up the truth? And that is when Farmby says yes. And so Steele was trying to make the connection between there were possibly things happening in these interviews that weren't recorded that maybe swayed answers in the ones that were recorded. So that was a really interesting way for Brian Steele to come to push that conclusion. I think that is it for today. It was a very long day of text messages and cross-examination, but we did learn a lot of information. Brian Steele is very interesting to watch in the courtroom. He's very self-assured. He has a very respectful way of presenting himself to everyone that he's speaking to, and so it's been an interesting thing to watch and to share. Hopefully everything was good audio today, and I will be posting a full breakdown of today later after lunch. Right now I'm gonna go have a snack, but you can find everything, all these full stories at lamag.com, as well as LA Mag on X.